The Great Hall of the Galactic Concord Council was the largest structure ever built by intelligent beings. It floated in the darkness between stars, a monument to the power of the 12 elder species who ruled the galaxy. For 10,000 years, they had kept order. They had decided which species could rise and which must fall. They were the masters of everything. Today, they gathered to decide the fate of humanity. Ambassador stood alone on a small platform in the center of the hall. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes. Around her, rising up like mountains, sat the representatives of the 12 elder species, the with their scaled skin and cold yellow eyes, the with their 4 arms and ancient faces, the crystalline who sang instead of speaking, and 9 others, each more powerful than anything humanity had ever faced. Had been an ambassador for 30 years. She had negotiated trade deals and peace treaties. She had smiled at creatures who disgusted her and shook hands with beings who had no hands. But she had never felt as small as she felt now. The High Speaker of the Council, a named, looked down at her with contempt. His voice echoed through the hall like thunder. The Council has reviewed the evidence. Humanity has expanded to 47 colony worlds in 300 years. Your population has grown to 19 billion. Your technology advances faster than any species in recorded history. Nodded, we are proud of what we have achieved. We have worked hard to build a future for our children. You misunderstand, said. His thin lips pulled back to show rows of sharp teeth. This is not praise, this is a warning. You expand like a disease. You consume resources like fire consumes a forest. You breed without control. Another council member spoke. This was Prime, and its voice was like breaking glass. We have seen species like yours before. They grow too fast. They become dangerous. They must be stopped before they threaten the stability of the galaxy. Felt her heart beating faster, but she kept her voice calm. We have never attacked anyone. We have never threatened the Council. We only want to live in peace and grow alongside the elder species. That is what they all say, replied. And then one day they decide they want more. We will not wait for that day. The Council members began to vote. One by one they raised their appendages or spoke their agreement, watched in growing horror as the verdict became clear. 11 species voted yes. Only one, a small race called the voted no, but they were the weakest of the elder species. Their vote meant nothing. Smiled his terrible smile. The Council has reached its decision. Humanity is hereby sentenced to Quarantine Protocol Omega. Your species will be confined to your home system. Your colony worlds will be cleansed to prevent further expansion. Felt the blood drain from her face. Cleansed? What do you mean cleansed? The colonies will be sterilized. All human life outside your home system will be removed. This is necessary for galactic security. There are 17 billion people on those colonies, shouted. Her voice cracked with fear and anger. Children, families, you cannot simply murder them. We are not murdering anyone, said calmly. We are removing a threat. The colonists will be given 72 hours to evacuate to your home system. Any who remain will be dealt with. Knew this was a lie. There were not enough ships in all of human space to evacuate 17 billion people in 72 hours. The Council knew this too. They simply did not care. Please, she begged, please reconsider. We will limit our expansion. We will follow any rules you set. Just do not do this. The Council did not answer. The session was over. Guards came to escort back to her diplomatic vessel. As she walked through the halls of the great station, her mind raced with desperate thoughts. She had to warn Earth. She had to do something. But there was nothing she could do. The conquered fleet moved faster than any message she could send. 6 hours after the verdict, warships appeared in orbit around every human colony. They did not wait for 72 hours. They did not wait for evacuation. They simply opened fire. Learned what happened from fragmented transmissions that reached her ship. She sat alone in her quarters and watched the recordings. She saw cities burning from orbit. She heard the screams of millions as plasma rained from the sky. She listened to children calling for their parents in voices filled with terror. On the colony of New Geneva, a teacher named held his students close as the ceiling collapsed above them. On Prosperity Station, a mother pushed her baby into an escape pod and launched it into space, hoping someone would find it. No one ever did. On Harvest Moon, an old man stood in his garden and watched the sky turn white. His last words were a prayer in a language the galaxy would never hear again. 17 billion human beings died in less than 1 hour. When the transmissions finally stopped, sat in silence for a long time. She did not cry. Something inside her had changed. The woman who had believed in diplomacy and peace was gone. In her place was something harder and colder. On Earth, the governments received the news. For 1 hour, the entire planet fell silent. People stood in the streets and stared at nothing. Parents held their children. Soldiers dropped their weapons. Priests forgot their prayers. Then Supreme Commander addressed the world. He was an old soldier with white hair and scars on his face. His eyes were red from tears he would never admit to shedding. His voice was steady and cold. "They have taken everything from us," he said. "Our children, our future, our hope. They looked at humanity and saw vermin to be exterminated. They thought we would accept this. They thought we would crawl into our corner of the galaxy and die quietly." He paused and looked directly into the camera. "They were wrong. Today we stop being victims. Today we stop being afraid. Today we become the thing they feared we would become. Not because we want to, but because they left us no choice." Across the planet, 17 billion candles were lit, one for every soul that had been taken. And in the light of those candles, humanity made a promise. They would not forget. They would not forgive. And one day, the galaxy would learn the price of their mistake. The Council had wanted to prevent humanity from becoming a threat. Instead, they had created the greatest enemy the galaxy had ever known. And humanity was just getting started. 5 years passed, and the galaxy forgot about humanity. The conquered council congratulated themselves on their wise decision. They had removed a growing threat before it could become dangerous. The remaining humans were trapped in their home system, surrounded by a barrier of conquered warships and sensor stations. They could not leave. They could not expand. They would slowly fade away, just another failed species in the long history of the galaxy. High Speaker gave speeches about the importance of maintaining order. He spoke of the difficult choices that leaders must make. He never mentioned the 17 billion dead. In the Council's official records, the event was called the Human Correction. It was described as a necessary action to preserve galactic stability. Some of the younger species whispered among themselves. They had seen the recordings that leaked from human space before the quarantine. They had heard the screams, but they were afraid to speak too loudly. The elder species did not tolerate questions. Behind the quarantine barrier, Earth was changing. The first year was the hardest. People walked through their days like ghosts. Factories sat empty. Ships gathered dust in their docks. The weight of grief pressed down on every human heart like a physical force. Many simply gave up and stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped living. But humans are strange creatures. They are not like other species in the galaxy. When other species face total defeat, they accept their fate. They surrender to despair. Humans do not. In the second year, the grief began to transform. It did not disappear. It simply changed shape. It became something else. It became purpose. Supreme Commander called a meeting of every leader on Earth. Presidents and generals, scientists and factory workers, artists and engineers. They gathered in a great hall that had once been used for peace conferences. Now it would be used for war. "We have 2 choices," told them. "We can accept what they did to us and die slowly behind their barrier, or we can fight. Not today, not tomorrow, but one day, when we are ready, when they have forgotten to be afraid." A scientist named Dr. Sarah raised her hand. How can we fight? They have thousands of warships. They have technology we cannot match. We are trapped in a single system with 2 billion people. Smiled, it was not a happy smile. That is what they think, and we will let them continue thinking that. For now, we build, we learn, we prepare, and we wait. The plan was simple in concept but massive in scale. Every resource humanity had would be focused on one goal, building a military force capable of destroying the conquered. Every factory would make weapons. Every laboratory would develop new technology. Every school would train soldiers and scientists. The old divisions between nations disappeared. There were no more Americans or Chinese or Russians or Brazilians. There was only humanity, one species, one purpose, one burning desire for justice. Ambassador returned to Earth and took a new position. She became Director of External Operations. Her job was to gather information about the enemy. The conquered thought all humans were trapped in the Sol system. They were wrong. When the colonies were destroyed, thousands of humans had been traveling between worlds. Traders, tourists, workers. They were stranded outside the quarantine barrier. The conquered did not bother hunting them down. They were considered harmless. They were not harmless. Built a network of spies across conquered space. Human servants who worked in alien households and listened to conversations. Human mechanics who repaired conquered ships and studied their technology. Human traders who visited ports and military installations and counted ships and weapons. They sent their information through hidden channels and gathered it all. The conquered had no idea they were being watched. In secret facilities hidden inside asteroids, human engineers took apart captured conquered technology. They studied it, learned how it worked, and then made it better. The elder species had grown comfortable over 10,000 years. They had stopped innovating. Their technology was old, unchanged for centuries. Human technology evolved every day. Driven by grief and rage, human scientists made discoveries that should have taken decades. They developed new weapons, new engines, new shields. They built ships inside hollowed-out rocks where conquered sensors could not see them. Doctor led a team working on the most ambitious project, a weapon that could convert matter directly into energy. The conquered's greatest physicists had declared such a weapon impossible. Doctor did not care what the conquered thought was possible. She worked 18 hours a day. When her assistants begged her to rest, she showed them a picture she kept on her desk. It was a photograph of her daughter, who had lived on the colony of New Geneva. Her daughter had been 7 years old when the conquered ships came. "I will rest when this is finished," Doctor said, "not before." Stories like hers existed in every laboratory, every factory, every training facility on Earth. Everyone had lost someone. Everyone carried their grief like a weapon. It drove them to work harder, think faster, push beyond every limit. The younger generation grew up knowing only one truth. The galaxy had tried to kill them, and one day they would answer. Children trained for combat before they learned to read. Schools taught tactics and engineering alongside history and literature. Every human being was a soldier now, whether they wore a uniform or not. 5 years after the genocide, received a report from one of her spies. The conquered was planning to reduce the quarantine fleet. They believed humanity was no longer a threat. The barrier would be maintained but with fewer ships. The resources would be used elsewhere. Smiled when she read this. She went to Supreme Commander's office and placed the report on his desk. "They have forgotten," she said. Read the report slowly. When he finished, he looked up with eyes that held 5 years of waiting. "Then it is time," he said. Nodded. "How will we begin?" Stood and walked to his window. Outside, the night sky was filled with stars. Each one represented a system controlled by the conquered. Soon, those stars would learn to fear a new light. "We begin with a message," said. "We begin by showing them what their mistake has cost them. We begin by making them remember why they should have been afraid." In the asteroid bases, orders were transmitted. Ships that had waited in darkness for 5 years began to power up their engines. Weapons that had never been fired were loaded and armed. Soldiers who had trained their entire lives prepared for the battle they had always known was coming. The silence was over. Humanity was ready. The attack came without warning. Admiral of the Navy was enjoying his evening meal when the alarms began to scream. He dropped his food and ran to the command center of Shipyard Prime, the largest military construction facility in the galaxy. Through the massive windows, he could see hundreds of half-built warships floating in their docks. This shipyard had produced ships for the conquered for 3,000 years. "What is happening?" demanded. His officers were staring at their screens with faces full of confusion and fear. "Admiral, we are detecting an energy signature unlike anything in our records. It is coming from directly below the station." Looked down through the window. At first he saw nothing but stars. Then one of those stars began to grow brighter and brighter. It was not a star at all. It was a weapon. The light consumed Shipyard Prime in less than a second. The entire station, along with 300 warships and 40,000 crew members, simply ceased to exist. The energy release was visible from planets 100 light-years away. It looked like a new star being born. It was the death scream of the Conquered's power. At the same moment, across 40 different systems, similar attacks struck. Communication relays that connected the elder species were destroyed. Fuel depots that supplied their fleets exploded. Sensor stations that watched the borders of conquered space went dark. In one coordinated strike, humanity had blinded and crippled the greatest power in the galaxy. On the conquered council station, High Speaker received reports with growing horror. His hands trembled as he read the casualty figures. His voice cracked as he demanded explanations. "How is this possible?" he screamed at his admirals. "The humans were contained, they were broken, they had no fleet." His chief intelligence officer, unnamed, spoke carefully. "It appears we underestimated them, High Speaker. They have been building in secret for 5 years. They have developed weapons we did not believe were possible." "Then we will crush them with our full strength," declared. "Summon every ship from every species. We will teach these humans the cost of defying the Council." The response was massive. Every elder species contributed ships to the fleet. They sent their dreadnoughts, massive vessels bristling with weapons. They sent their crystal ships that could sing enemies to death with focused sound. They sent their ancient battle cruisers, each one older than human civilization. Over 30,000 warships gathered at the nebula. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. Himself came to watch the battle. He wanted to see the humans destroyed with his own eyes. The human fleet arrived 3 hours later. There were only 2,000 ships. Laughed when he saw the numbers. "Is this their great rebellion?" he said. 30,000 against 2,000. This will not be a battle, it will be an execution." Supreme Commander watched the conquered fleet from the bridge of his flagship, the Remembrance. His face showed no fear. Beside him stood Director, who had left her desk to see this moment with her own eyes. "They think they have already won," said. Nodded, "They are about to learn otherwise." He opened a channel to every ship in his fleet. "This is Supreme Commander. Today we fight for our dead. We fight for 17 billion souls who cry out for justice. We fight because they gave us no other choice. Show them what humanity has become. Show them the price of their arrogance for Earth, for our children, for everyone we lost." The battle began. Conquered doctrine said that larger fleets should spread out and surround smaller enemies. Their admirals had studied this tactic for centuries. They knew it worked against every species they had ever fought. But they had never fought humans. The human ships did not try to escape the encirclement. Instead, they drove straight into the heart of the conquered formation. They moved faster than conquered sensors could track. Their weapons fired in patterns that seemed random but were actually perfectly calculated. Each shot hit a vital system. Each explosion triggered chain reactions in nearby ships. The conquered admirals shouted orders that made no sense for this kind of battle. Their ships got in each other's way. Their weapons hit their own allies as often as they hit enemies. The beautiful formation they had created became a chaotic mess of fire and debris. Human pilots flew missions that should have been suicide. They aimed their ships at enemy engines and ejected at the last second. They overloaded their own reactors to create explosions that took out dozens of enemy vessels. They died by the thousands, and they took the enemy with them. Doctor's impossible weapon fired again and again. Each shot erased a conquered dreadnought from existence. The flagship, pride of their navy, vanished in a flash of light. Its destruction was so complete that not even atoms remained. 6 hours into the battle, the conquered fleet began to retreat. Their admirals could not believe what was happening. They had superior numbers. They had the most powerful ships in the galaxy, but they were losing. By the 9th hour, it was over. 18,000 conquered warships had been destroyed. The survivors fled in all directions, their formations broken, their confidence shattered. Human losses were 800 ships. Watched from his observation deck as his mighty fleet died around him. His guards had to drag him to an escape pod as the station came under attack. He escaped with his life, but his pride was destroyed. Broadcast a message to the entire galaxy. His face appeared on every screen in conquered space. The elder species saw a human for the first time since the quarantine began. They saw cold eyes and a voice like ice. "You called us vermin," said. "You murdered our children. You thought you could erase us from the galaxy. You were wrong. Vermin survive. Vermin adapt. Vermin remember, we are coming for you now. Not to conquer, not to enslave. We are coming for justice. Every species that voted for our destruction will answer for what they did. There is nowhere to hide. There is no force that can stop us. You created this enemy. Now you will face it." The transmission ended. Across the galaxy, the elder species looked at each other with new eyes. For 10,000 years, they had been the masters of everything. They had never known fear. Now they did. The humans were coming, and nothing would ever be the same again. The war spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Human fleets appeared in system after system. They struck military targets with terrible precision. Shipyards burned. Weapons factories crumbled. Defense stations fell silent. The elder species watched their power crumble and could do nothing to stop it. But the humans did not attack civilians. This was the order that Supreme Commander gave to every ship, every soldier, every pilot in his forces. They were not fighting to destroy. They were fighting to win. And winning meant being better than the enemy that had tried to destroy them. On the planet IV, a colony world, human troops landed near a military base. The local commander prepared his forces for a brutal ground battle. He expected the humans to burn everything in their path. He had heard stories of human rage. He believed they would show no mercy. The battle for the base lasted 2 days. The humans fought with skill and fury. They broke through every defense. They destroyed every weapon. But when they found wounded soldiers, they did not kill them. They gave them medical care. The local commander surrendered when he realized he could not win. Human soldiers took his weapons and asked him where the nearest hospital was. They had injured troops who needed treatment. "You are asking me for help," the commander said. He could not understand. The human captain who spoke to him was a young woman with scars on her face and grief in her eyes. "We are not monsters," she said. "We know what it feels like to have your people murdered. We will not do the same to yours, but your military must be destroyed. You must never have the power to hurt us again." This story spread across space, then across the entire galaxy. The humans were coming, yes, but they were not coming to genocide. They were coming to disarm. On the slave world of human forces discovered something that changed the war. They had been keeping slaves for thousands of years. They took members of weaker species and forced them to work in mines and factories. The conquered knew about this. The conquered allowed it. Human soldiers opened the camps and freed over 2 million slaves from a dozen different species. They gave them food, medicine, and transport to wherever they wanted to go. The freed slaves could not believe what was happening. No one had ever helped them before. "Why?" asked the slave master who had been freed alongside the others. "Why do you help us? We are not human." The human soldier who answered him was an old man with white hair. He had lost his entire family on the colony of New Geneva. He had every reason to hate every non-human in the galaxy, but he did not. "Because no one deserves to be a slave," the old man said. "Because we know what it feels like to have someone decide your life is worth nothing. We will not become what we are fighting against." News of the liberation spread faster than any military report. The younger species, who had lived in fear of the elder species for thousands of years, began to see humanity differently. These were not the monsters the conquered had warned them about. These were something else entirely. One by one, the elder species sued for peace. They were first. They had always been uncomfortable with the genocide decision. Their ambassador came to Supreme Commander with offers of surrender and payment. Refused. "You do not get to buy your way out of this," he told the ambassador. "You voted to murder 17 billion innocent people. You will face justice for that crime. Not death, not genocide, justice." The came next, then others. Each received the same answer. Humanity would not negotiate until every council member who had voted for the genocide was arrested and ready to stand trial. Director traveled to each elder species personally. She carried with her recordings from the day of the genocide. She made each government official watch. She made them listen to the screams. She made them see the faces of children dying. "You did this," she said to each of them. "You cannot undo it, but you can answer for it. That is the only path forward." High Speaker was the last to be captured. He had been hiding on a remote colony, protected by loyal soldiers. Human special forces found him in an underground bunker. When they brought him out into the light, he was no longer the proud leader who had condemned humanity to death. He was a frightened old creature who begged for mercy. The human commander who captured him showed no emotion. "You will have a fair trial," she said. "You will be judged by representatives of every species in the galaxy. That is more than you gave us." Was transported to a neutral station where the trials would be held. For the first time in galactic history, the powerful would be judged by those they had ruled over. The younger species sent observers. They wanted to see if humanity would keep its promise. A new court was formed. It included judges from every species, elder and younger alike. The proceedings were broadcast across the galaxy. Everyone watched. The evidence was overwhelming. Recordings of council meetings, military orders, communication logs. Everything proved that the genocide had been planned and carried out with full knowledge of what it would mean. Tried to defend himself. "We were protecting the galaxy," he argued. "Humanity was a threat. We did what was necessary for the greater good." The human prosecutor was a young man named David, the grandson of Supreme Commander. His parents had died on a colony world. His voice was steady as he responded. "You were protecting your power," David said. "You were afraid of competition. You looked at our children and decided they deserved to die because they might one day challenge you. That is not protection. That is murder." The court agreed. And the other council members who had voted for the genocide were found guilty. Their sentences varied based on their level of involvement. Some received life imprisonment. Some were exiled to barren worlds. A few, following their own cultural traditions, chose to end their own lives rather than face the shame. But none were executed. Humanity had promised justice, not revenge. They kept that promise. When the trials ended, the galaxy was different. The old order was gone. The elder species no longer ruled supreme, and humanity had proven something that no one had believed possible. They had won the war without becoming monsters. Now they had to build the peace. The old galaxy was dead. A new one was being born. The Galactic Concord Council had ruled for 10,000 years. It had controlled trade, military power, and the fate of every species. It had decided who could expand and who must remain small. It had protected its own power above all else. Now it was gone. In its place, humanity proposed something different. Not another empire. Not another group of powerful species ruling over weaker ones. Instead, they proposed a true assembly where every species, no matter how old or how young, had an equal voice. Many of the elder species resisted this idea. They had ruled for so long that they could not imagine any other way. The ambassador argued that younger species did not have the wisdom to govern. The claim that equal representation would lead to chaos. Supreme Commander, now old and tired from years of war, answered them himself. "You had wisdom," he said. "You had 10,000 years of experience. And what did you do with it? You murdered children because they frightened you. You kept slaves because it was profitable. You crushed any species that might challenge your power. If that is wisdom, then perhaps it is time to try something else." The debate lasted for months. Human diplomats met with representatives from every species in the galaxy. They listened to concerns. They addressed fears. They made compromises where they could. Director led many of these negotiations. She was old now, her hair white and her hands marked with age. But her mind was still sharp and her will was still iron. "We are not trying to rule you," she told a gathering of nervous ambassadors. "We are trying to make sure that no one ever rules anyone again. Every species will have a voice. Every species will have rights that cannot be taken away. No more genocides. No more slavery. No more decisions made by a few powerful beings while everyone else suffers." The younger species supported humanity's proposal. They had been waiting for this moment for thousands of years. They had lived in fear of the elder species for so long that they had forgotten what it felt like to hope. One by one, species signed the charter of the new unified assembly. The who had been the only elder species to vote against the genocide were the first of the old powers to join. Others followed slowly, realizing that they had no choice. The old way was over. The first session of the Unified Assembly was held on a new station built in neutral space. Representatives from over 200 species gathered in a great hall. Humans sat among them, no higher and no lower than anyone else. Supreme Commander gave the opening address. He was 90 years old now. He needed help to walk to the podium, but his voice was still strong. "We stand here today because of a terrible crime," he began. 17 billion human beings were murdered by the old council. They died because the powerful feared what we might become. I carry their memory with me every day. I will carry it until I die. He paused and looked around the hall. His eyes moved from face to face, species to species. "But I did not come here today to talk about the past. I came to talk about the future. We have a choice now. We can build a galaxy based on fear, where the strong crush the weak before they can become a threat. Or we can build something better. A galaxy where every species is valued, where disputes are resolved through words instead of weapons, where children can grow up without fearing that someone will decide they deserve to die." His voice grew stronger. "We did not fight to rule. We fought because you took everything from us and expected us to die quietly. You learned that humanity does not die quietly. But more importantly, you learned that we do not become the evil we oppose. We are not your masters. We are your equals. Let that be enough for all of us." The hall was silent when he finished. Then, slowly, applause began. It spread from species to species until the entire assembly was standing, honoring the old soldier who had led his people through darkness and refused to let that darkness consume them. The work of building the new order took years. There were arguments and setbacks. Old hatreds did not disappear overnight, but slowly things changed. Trade routes reopened, now free from conquered tariffs and restrictions. Species that had been kept isolated for centuries began to communicate. Scientists shared research across species lines. Artists created works that combined traditions from a dozen different worlds. The former slave species were given their own worlds and the resources to build new civilizations. Human volunteers helped them establish farms and factories and schools. It was not charity. It was a debt that the galaxy owed them. Retired after the Assembly's first successful year, she was too old and too tired to continue, but she had one more task to complete. She traveled to a world that had no official name. The records called it Colony 17. Humans called it Hope. 5 years ago, this world had been one of the 47 colonies destroyed by the conquered. Billions of people had died here. The surface had been burned to bare rock. Now it was green again. Human had worked for years to restore the planet. Grass grew where cities had stood. Flowers bloomed where children had played. Walked through a young forest near what had once been the capital city. She carried a small bag in her hands. Inside were seeds from Earth, from trees that had grown in her family's garden for generations. She planted them one by one. Each seed represented a life lost. Each tree would grow tall and strong. One day, children would play in their shade, never knowing that this ground had once been soaked in death. Her granddaughter found her there as the sun was setting. The young woman had been born after the war. She had never known the fear and grief that had shaped her grandmother's generation. "Why do you keep coming here?" her granddaughter asked. Looked at the young trees, barely visible in the fading light. "Because someone has to remember. Someone has to tend the memory of what was lost. And someone has to remind the galaxy what happens when we forget to value every life." She took her granddaughter's hand and stood up slowly. "The stars belong to everyone now," said. "We made sure of that, but freedom is not something you win once. It is something you must fight for every day. Your generation must continue what we started." Her granddaughter nodded. She understood. Far above them, ships from a dozen different species moved peacefully through the stars. They carried traders and travelers, scientists and artists. They carried the future. Humanity had been nearly destroyed by the old order. In response, they had destroyed that order and built something better. They had proven that rage could be controlled, that grief could be transformed, that the worst tragedy could lead to the greatest triumph. The galaxy had tried to end humanity. Instead, humanity had changed the galaxy forever. And they would make sure no one ever forgot why.